everybody! I'd like to thank every one of you for clicking on this video. Today I'm going to show you how to shorten the cuffs on a suit jacket. Particularly, I'm going to be using a coat as example, but this technique works for every type of cuff that has a vent in it. Let me show you. So this is the coat I'm going to be working on today. And you see it has the gap here. And it opens all the way up here. So I'm going to show you how to do this. And by the time you're done and I'm done, you won't even be able to tell that you touched it at all. In order to do this project, you have to have a few tools. One is you have to have some chalk. This is Taylor's chalk. It disappears when heat is applied. You can purchase it on Wawak if you don't have any. But if you're in a pinch and you don't have any, and you don't know what to use, you can just rely on the measurements. And you'll have to measure more often to ensure that you're making it the correct length. Other items you need are a seam ripper, a point turner, scissors. I like to use a rotary knife to make my initial cut, just to make sure it's nice, clean, and straight. And in that category, we also have a ruler, a straight edge. We also need pins, and we also need sewing needles. Another thing you need is very important, is you need an iron that has a good wool setting and an ironing board. And of course I have a cutting mat because I am going to be using the rotary knife. Okay, the first step when you're shortening sleeves is to take the measurement. This is the measurement, the final length. And you want to put your chalk mark right at this final length. This way, you can take your pin out and you have that length and you know that it's not going to go anywhere, and you will always be able to tell what the length for this garment is. Which is very important, because if you don't do this step and you take the pin out, you have to have the client put the coat on, or your dad or uncle or whoever sleeves you're shortening for. The next step is to take your seam ripper and take these buttons off. So what I do is I peel them back and I get my seam ripper underneath, make sure it's sharp, and I go between. So you have 4 buttonholes right here. You go between them. So you catch 2 and then you rip it, or you cut the thread. Whatever sounds more delicate. And then it pops right off. Now what I like to do is I like to take these buttons and put them in a safe place so they don't get lost, because they have to be put back on. Sometimes I put them in a bag and then put them in the pocket of the coat or jacket or suit coat or sport jacket, whatever you're working on. And I put them in the pocket so that they don't just get lost, because I find that as soon as the button touches the ground, it's gone. Okay. The next step is to go on the inside. Just peel it back a little bit, like flip it like you're turning a cuff up, and then go between the fashion fabric and the lining and just pick a couple of stitches. And once you do that, it'll start peeling away very easily. And you just pull it until it stops, and then you cut some more, and then you pull it until it stops, and you cut some more, pull it until it stops, cut some more, all the way around. Okay, and then I like pulling the sleeve up because usually it's caught up a couple inches as well. And this is, I just take this off so it's easier to work with. And now you have the lining detached. The next step is to add this seam. It's across where the pleat is. There's usually a couple of stitches that tack this together. Right now there isn't, so we're good to go. Now we can go over to the side that has the vent on it, and anywhere it's stitched together at the bottom, just take the stitches gently and open them up. And then these are the button threads, and you just one by one go through and open. Very nice and easy. And once you get to the seam, if you're not shortening it very much, you don't have to open it. But I'm shortening it about 1.5 inches. So I am actually going to open this seam until this corner. That way I have more wiggle room, more room to maneuver. Okay, and you'll see that it's cut right there, and that means you've opened it up properly. The next step is to open this stitches right here on this vent, just like that, and then go over to this corner and open these stitches as well. And the next step is to just take all of these threads out. I find that cleaning the threads is the longest of any one step. And you can't skip this part, because if you skip this part, your job looks very, very sloppy. And we don't want to do sloppy work. The next step is to take these buttonholes out. Now these buttonholes are just embroidered on, and they're done with a specialty machine that I do not have, so they will not be going back on the coat. They do look nice, but if you don't have the machine, you can't put them back, and that's okay. That's okay. So these kind of look intimidating because there are a whole bunch of tight stitches right next to each other. But they're actually not that difficult to take apart. Now, generally, when you're taking these buttonholes out, all you have to do is unpick this knot right here. This is where the button was sold. This is where the button was sewn, right here. You unpick these stitches, and then you can just pull the thread, and the button comes out in like 2 seconds. But due to this coat being a felt rather than a woven, I believe that the stitches are catching and are not pulling out as desired. So for this particular coat, I have to hand pick all of these stitches out so that I don't damage the fabric. Buttonholes all out, and I've just got the one left to do. Okay, and you'll know you're ready to start the next step once everything is clean, there's no threads, and there's nothing sewn together. So everything should be open. Oh, there's a little guy right here. Let's get rid of him. And there should be no loose threads anywhere. So now that you've opened this sleeve, just go to the next sleeve and open that. So this process has to be done twice. And it can be a little annoying, but it also can be relaxing in my opinion. So just go and do the other sleeve, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, so the next step is to shorten or to cut the sleeves. So the first thing you want to do is take the lining of the sleeve and shove it way up into the sleeve so it doesn't get cut. And then go to the other side and do the same thing. Shove the lining way up into the sleeve. And then what I like doing is I like laying the sleeves out flat like this, and I line up these corners and then I make that flat, and I line up the bottom. And unfortunately, when this was manufactured, they cut the corner out of here. That is to make it lay flatter, but it makes it very difficult to make the jacket longer if you ever need to. So, just lay this flat and square, and I'm just going to stick some pins into it just to make sure nothing moves. And I like pinning the sleeves together, but you always make sure you pin well above this length mark. And that's because you have to be able to open this. Okay, now that you've made sure everything's nice and square, you take this mark and you take your ruler and you measure how far this mark is from the edge. In my case, the mark is 2 3/4 of an inch. So then you go over here and you go at 2 3/4 of an inch and you make your mark. Now you go to the back side. Let me get my skinnier ruler, might be a little easier. Now you take your ruler and you put it on the back side, the sleeve side of the sleeve. Line it up with that mark, and you just take your chalk, make sure everything's lined up, and you move the chalk across the sleeve at that line. And then you flip this up, and you do the same thing right in this crease. And you flip this bottom one up, and you do the same thing on the bottom. And now you can take your ruler away. And you see you have lines at the proper measurement on all sides of the sleeve. Now, the next step is to cut the inside cuff to length. Now for this step, you can either mark it individually and cut individually, or if you're in my case and you have a rotary knife, you get that, and your little handy dandy ruler, and you cut the fabric 2 1/2 inches, no, I'm sorry, 2 1/4 inches below this line. Okay, well this isn't working because I have a dull blade, so I'm just going to go and I'm going to mark it with a chalk, and I'm going to cut this off with the scissors. You take this extra fabric and you just throw it in the trash. Now for this next step, we need your iron and your ironing board. And you can just take a look at the iron, and it usually has at the bottom, sorry mine's a little messed up, but it says what heat setting to use for the fabric. Now I believe my wool setting is 5, but it's broken off so you can't tell. So I'm going to just put it up, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to put it up just at 4. Because I don't know if this is 100% wool or if it's a synthetic blend, and I don't want to damage the fabric. And make sure you have steam settings. So now while my iron is warming up, I'm going to tell you how to do this little cuff section with a vent section. So I want you to take a look at the sleeve, and I want you to choose the one that was folded into a corner, because we're going to make this corner into a corner at the right length now. So what I want you to do is I want you to fold along this line, and then I want you to fold at the new length. And if you want to hold it in place, you can, and not worry about your hands getting burned, you can always just put a little pin in it. Okay. Now what I want you to do is making sure you have your steam setting on. Just take this new fold, put your iron on, and hold it for a few seconds. Take a look, and then hold it for a few seconds. We don't want to burn the fabric, but we do want it to get pressed. Okay. Just going to let it sit for a couple seconds, make sure it cools off, because wool does hold a lot of heat. Okay. And now you'll see you have these new folds, and your old chalk line has disappeared. So now that you have this new corner, what I want you to do is I want you to open it up. Just put a little pin at the corner. Going out like this. And we need to fold it so that we need to fold this corner in. So that when you fold this up and this up, they meet at a little 90-degree angle here. Now you want this piece to be smaller than this piece. So see how I don't have it 45 degrees. It should be like this. It's more of an acute angle for this little section. So the way I like doing it is fold the 90 and then take my finger here, pinch that, and then from here to the corner and then out, make a straight line. And you can just do test fold, and then this gets folded on that new crease, and then this one also gets folded on that new crease, and you just make sure it's making a nice angle and it's all on the lines. Okay, now that looks good, so I'm going to open this back up again. And I want to press here, and I want to press here. Do not press where the pin is, because if you do that, you'll lose your corner, and you don't want to do that. Okay, that's nice and square, and you want this right here to be 90 degrees. So I'm just going to, because this fabric is so thick and it wants to move on its own, I'm going to put a couple pins in here just to hold it down. And preferably, if you're going to iron on pins, you want to make sure they have a metal head. I don't have, oh, actually I do have some pins with metal heads. Let me go find them. Now these little things are called dressmaker pins. And I love them for this purpose. Okay, now I can take my plastic pins out. And now I don't have to worry about the plastic being melted onto the iron or anything. Now you see here there's a little space where they don't line up perfectly, and that's okay. You want to get it as close as you can, but if you can't get it perfect, just get it as close as you can. Okay. We're going to iron this. Gonna give it a little break. Now we're going to put some more steam on it. And give it a little break. And then this is this corner. And that's all we have to do for this pressing step on this side. Now we have to go press this other side of the vent. This side is a lot easier. All you do is you see this old line where it was bent or pressed, and you take that and you bring it all the way down. I'm going to put a pin right here where the new line is going to be. And I'm going to fold this bottom part up so that this pin and the crease are on the bottom now. And I'm going to put a pin up here. Now these pins are mostly unnecessary, but because this fabric is thicker, I'm just going to rely on the pins a little bit more than I would normally. And you want to put some on this chalk line as well. Now, if you accidentally apply heat to this chalk line and it disappears, don't worry, because you know that the distance from the chalk line to this edge is 2 1/4 inches. So just think about that. Don't panic. You just lay this down. Nice and square. And give it a nice press. And you know it's pressed when it wants to keep the shape that you just pressed into it. So let's take these pins out and just let them cool for a couple of seconds, because if you touch them right away, you'll burn yourself. Let's just get these pins out of the way. Now you see it wants to fold where you put the new creases in, which is good. That's exactly what you want. And now we have to go to the sewing machine. Okay, so now the next step is to sew these sleeves, or sew the vents. So we have our corner, and what I want you to do is I want you to put a pin right in the corner, and then I want you to fold the crease that we made, and I need you to sew this side to this side. So what we do is we hold it flat, have the pin pointing outwards, and then just bring these two sides together. Nice in alignment. And then to hold them together, you put the pin in the crease here, and out through the crease here, and then back into the crease, back through the crease. And you just put this under the machine. Of course, you remember the back stitch. And just cut these threads and cut them on the back. And now, the next step is to take your point turner, put it right here on the inside in this little seam allowance, and then help that, and then push it out, and push this, make this point nice and stiff. And then you can see you have this side done, and it's nice and square, the corner is pointy, it's flat, and you can just take your point turner, put it in the corner, and then just wiggle it around to make sure that's nice and crisp. Now, when you have a thinner fabric or just a normal suit fabric, you got to be careful because this may be dull, but it can poke through the fabric, and you don't want that. Okay, and now we're going to do the same thing-ish over here. We're going to take our pin, put it in that corner, and then take this line over to this line, and then just put those creases together. Put a pin in it to keep it all nice and lined up. And then just put it under the machine. Not forgetting to backstitch. And you bring that all the way up. Okay, and now you take your point turner, put it inside this crease right here, and then just gently guide it and make sure it's turned. And you get a nice crisp corner right there. And now you have the two sides of your vent all nice and lined up. And you can see that they meet when they close, and they're nice and flush. So the next step is to sew this part back together. So what we do is we kind of turn it inside out, not completely, but we just turn it so that we can see the inside. And what I want you to do is I want you to follow down this corner and then turn, and then just sew them together, line up the points. Make it nice and even. And you see there's about a ½ inch here and then about 3/8 here. Just try to match whatever was there originally. And we just run that corner under our machine. This can be a little tricky because the fabric doesn't always want to move where you want it to move. And don't forget to backstitch. And then just turn it and follow this all the way to the end. And don't forget to backstitch. And take it out and cut your little thread tails. And now you've got the little nice vent here, and it wants to stay nice and closed. And that looks very nice. It lines up and it just sits right where you want it to sit. The next step is to go to this back seam and take your ruler you have a smaller ruler, you can use it. One even smaller than this would be nice. And I want you to go on the inside of this seam and then just measure up 2 1/4 inches, which, if you remember, is the seam allowance we made. And I want you to take your chalk and put it right along that line. If you don't have chalk, you could put a pin there. And now what I want you to do is I want you to take this one flap, and I want you to flip this side of the seam allowance up, just like that. And I want you to pinch it, just like that. And now we're just going to sew about 3/4 of an inch here. Don't sew it all the way because we'll need this later. We'll need this to be open later. So just sew it about 3/4 of an inch, and then sew it as close to the seam as you can make it. If your needle moves, this would be a good time to shift it all the way to the left. And I want you to go forward and forward and backwards, just a little bit. And then cut your thread tails. And then we have your sleeve nice and ready for the lining to be attached. Now I'm just going to go and do the other sleeve at the same time. And then I'll show you the first or the proper steps in order to make the lining the correct length and to put it back into the coat. Okay, so the next part is to measure the lining of the sleeve. So what I want you to do is I want you to take this shoulder seam in your left hand, if you're left-handed, right hand if you're right-handed, right hand if you're left-handed, and I want you to pinch the lining to the sleeve at this point. That way we know the sleeve lining isn't going to be pulled and made too short. So now I want you to reach up into the sleeve and take that sleeve lining and then just pull it out to the end of the sleeve. And you want to make sure that sleeve is turned where that final length is going to be. So just lay your sleeve down, take the lining, and now that it's nice, you can just put your hand here to make sure it doesn't move. And I want you to measure the lining 1/2 inch below the end of the sleeve. I'm going to eyeball it, but if you don't trust your abilities to eyeball 1/2 inch, take your ruler and measure it. So now that I've got my cut mark, I'm going to open this up nice and wide. And I'm going to cut the sleeve evenly at that length all the way down. And now I'm going to repeat this on the other sleeve. Take the shoulder, grab the lining to the coat, and then reach into the sleeve, grab the lining, pull it flush, or pull it out, and then lay it flat on your table. Make sure the sleeve is folded on the proper final length. Take that lining, put your hand, and then eyeball or measure 1/2 inch below the end of the sleeve. Take that lining out. Lay it nice and flat, and take your scissors and cut it evenly across the end. For this this next part, I want you to take the sleeve, and I want you to take the seam right here, and I also want you to take the lining, and I want you to reach up into the arm and try to find this spot and find the seam of the lining and just follow it down with your hand, and you'll see it's this one. So now I want you to take some pins, and I want you to line these two seams up, and I want you to turn them right sides together, and then I want you to put a pin in it. And then repeat that with the other side. And you have to do it that specific way, because if you don't, the lining can get twisted and then you can't put your arm through, or it's too tight. So now that you've got the lining pinned to the outer fabric, I want you to just turn the sleeves inside out. And on the inside of the sleeves, you'll see right here that the sleeve is stitched on the outside. Might not show up well on camera here, but you'll be able to tell with your own sleeve. And I want you to take your handy dandy seam ripper and open that seam up. And now you've got this open. Now in some jackets, generally this will be ladies' jackets or coats, it'll only be open on one sleeve. And that's okay, because what I want you to do is I want you to take your hand and put it through the lining of the sleeve, and then go through the back of the fabric. I want you to grab that other sleeve and pull it through. Or, if you can't do that, there's some other thing going on. What you can do is just take this seam, the one that's pinned, and open it from about 2 inches, or actually let's go 5 inches above the bottom opening, and then about 3 inches from the arm's eye seam. And I want you to take your handy dandy seam ripper, and I want you to open that seam. And now that you have the sleeve open, I want you to take your hand, reach into this space between the lining and the sleeve, and I want you to find that pin and pull that out. Just like that. The next step involves a material that I did not mention at the top of this video, and that is some fusible web adhesive. So I want you to take this out. This particular fusible web adhesive is about 1/2 inch wide. I want you to take it out, and I want you to cut 4 little pieces. Two of them we're going to set aside, and 2 of them we are going to use right now. And just put the extra back where you store it. Now, from this point, I want you to pull the 2 sides together. And I want you to find the middle point of this side, which is right about here. It does not have to be exact. And I want you to put the lining right up next to that outer fabric. I want you to take a piece of glue, and on the side with the fashion fabric or the shell fabric, not the lining, I want you to put it up against the fabric. And I want you to take a pin, and I want you to pin it in place. I want you to follow this line until you get to the corner. And I want you to take this fabric and I want you to put a pin right here. And now I want you to go to that center pin and I want you to go the other direction. And I want you to find the center, pull the lining along, and I want you to take your second piece of glue. I'll put it up against the fabric and then put your pin through it. And then I want you to go all the way over here. Now this is the non-corner side of the vent. I want you to put a pin there too. And that should be 5 pins total. And now I want you to repeat this on the other sleeve. And now I want you to take this, as it is, over to your sewing machine. And you can take either sleeve. I'm going to start on this one. I don't know if it's the right or left. But I want you to find the side that has the straight stitch rather than the angle corner. Or the straight corner rather than the angle corner. And I want you to take this onto your machine. And for this side of the sleeve, I need you to sew on top of the lining, not on top of the fashion fabric. So you won't be able to see it really. So just place it down. And I want you to give yourself a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Don't forget to backstitch. And I just want you to sew along this opening. And of course you start your stitch at that corner, as close as you can get to that corner. And I just want you to go around the opening. I suggest taking the pins out as you go. It'll make it a little easier. And I want you to stop about a 1/2 inch before the side with the corner on it. And now I want you to take the lining where the 2 corners meet up. This might be a little confusing. Now I want you to take all of this and I want you to fold the 2 sides of the vent together. They'll tell you what way they want to fold. And I want you to line them up nice. Well, actually, what I want you to do is I want you to flip it right side out. And I want you to line these corners up so that there's no bubble right here. And so that they're even at the bottom. Just like that. And now I want you to take a pin. I want you to pin them together so that they don't move. And now I want you to access the lining opening again. And I want you to find where that vent is. and they're laying the way they want to lay. And I want you to take this and pin it flat. If it's open a little bit, that's okay. I just want you to take this seam allowance and fold it over just to get rid of that excess. And I want you to go fold this back, and I want you to stitch this seam together to this seam. So I want you to stitch right through here. It is a little complicated, just be patient. Now you can take these pins out, flip the coat right side out, take this pin out, and you'll see that the lining is completely stitched down. It's like you never even touched it. Now just do the other side, and I'll show you the next step. Now this side, since it's the opposite of the other one, you actually sew on the fashion fabric side. And maybe you started on the fashion fabric side that you stitch on, and then you go to the other one. The way you know where to start is you start at the side of the little pleat that is straight up and down and not at the angle. And you'll know what side is what because the one straight up and down has less extra fabric there. So now I just want you to take your sleeve and find the crease from where it was pressed originally. If you don't have your crease, that's okay. I want you to have this little opening vent about 1/2 inch from the edge on the top. Now I want you to take your iron, make sure it's on the steam setting, and I want you to just hold this down, and we're going to activate that fusible web adhesive. And then flip it over and do the back side. And you'll know that it's working if you pull this and the lining and it doesn't come apart. Now I just repeat the same process with the other sleeve. And for this next step, you need a small ruler, a pin, and a piece of chalk. What you do is you take the pin and you take these two ends so that they're level with each other, and you just pin them in place so you don't have to worry about them moving while you're sewing the buttons on. So now I just want you to measure 1.5 inches up and then a 1/2 inch in from the edge, and that's where we're going to put our first buttons, our first button hole placement. We're just going to put a little dot right there. That's where we're going to sew our button. And you can kind of judge where the old buttons were. So it looks on this coat, they were actually 3/4 inch in from the edge. So I'm going to do this 3/4 inch. But for yours, I want it to be 1/2 inch. If you're doing a suit coat. If you're doing a coat cut, probably make it at 3/4. Okay, let's put that new dot right there. And if you don't have chalk, you could put a pin right here, or 2 pins making an X at that mark. The next button is going to be 5/8 inch above this one. And again, the same distance from the edge of the vent. See, this is where the vent is. And now you have the proper spacing for all of your buttons. Now repeat this on the other sleeve. For this next part, you're going to need thread, bonus points if you have buttonhole thread, scissors, and some hand sewing needles. I'm going to take the one with the biggest eye. And we're going to take a generous piece of thread. I want you to thread the needle. And tie the knot just like you would do any other seam. And then just make sure the needle is at the middle of the thread. Now I want you to take your button, and I want you to go up through the back, and then I want you to go across. So this is going to be an X pattern button. You want to match the pattern of stitching that is already on the coat. So if you don't remember, just look at the front coat buttons. And I'm going to go over, and then I'm going to take my needle, and I'm going to put it behind the knot, right here, and I'm going to pull through. And now your button is attached to the end of the needle, so you can't drop it while you're working on it. Okay. Now this part is a little complicated. So you're going to take your hand, your non-dominant hand, and you're going to reach it up inside the sleeve, and you're going to put it through the hole in the lining. And you're going to put it behind this. And I want you to take a hold of it right here, and you'll feel the thickness. And I want you to put the stitch through, and I want you to go through all of the layers. And I want you to take your dominant hand, pull it through, making sure you don't catch anything you're not supposed to, and turn it around and poke it through the top. See, it looks like I caught this lining. So I'm going to have to cut it off and start over. Oh well. Okay. So you've got everything lined up, and you've pushed it through, and now you're going to take it and pull the thread through. My hand slipped, I got to put it back. And pinch it. And now you've got the buttonhole thread going through all of the layers of the cuff and the lining. And now I just want you to sew it down, going through all of those layers every time. And it's kind of up to personal preference how many times you go through the button. As long as it's strong, it's okay. These buttons are decorative, so it doesn't have to be super strong. And if you have thicker thread, you have to pass it less times. I think that's enough thread here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this button hole, but not through the fabric. So I'm just going to sneak it out the back. Just like that. And I'm going to take this extra thread and I'm going to wrap it around the button 2 or 3 times. 1, 2. And the third one, I'm going to take it and I'm going to make a little X. I'm going to loop it around the button and pull it tight. That just makes a little knot there, so that if any of the other buttons come off, this one doesn't. And now I want you to go put the needle in the fabric and I want you to tunnel up to this next dot. And I want you to take your next button. I like to try to make sure all of, like, if there's a decoration I like trying to make sure they're all going in the same spot. Okay, now this one we just have to sew through the top layer of fabric. You don't have to go through all of the layers. Oops, I forgot to go through the next button. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can twist the thread, the needle, and you can just slide it back through the fabric and you don't have to cut it. That has saved my butt on numerous times. Okay, now don't forget to go through the buttonhole before you take your next stitch. And when you get to this last button, just tunnel behind it, pull it out anywhere, take your hand out, and then cut that thread. And if you did it right, all of your ducks should be in a row, lined up, and evenly spaced. And if you don't like it, it's okay to take them off and put them back on again straighter. You can be picky about this because people would probably notice if the buttons aren't straight. So this, if you're going to be perfectionist about anything, this is what you want to be a perfectionist about. And now I'm just going to repeat that process on the other sleeve. Okay, so now that you've gotten the buttons all sewn on, you can take these pins out right here. And we're down to the last step. And what I need you to do is fold the sleeves inside out. And all we're going to do is just sew these holes back together. And you can just top stitch them. Even the most high-end companies top stitch. And now you're finished, and you can give yourself a well-deserved pat on the back. You got the functioning, well, it's not functioning, but you have the vent, the lining's all done. You deserve a pat on the back. I'd give it to you, but here, pat, 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 pat. Here's your pat on the back. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for watching this video. It's a little more alteration oriented. It's not new construction. I plan on getting into new construction in the next couple of weeks. I have a project planned and I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. I'd like to extend a big shout out to all 52 of my subscribers. I'll see everyone in a couple of weeks.